Mark and Conquest hurtled toward each other with incredible force, the impact of their collision sending a massive shockwave through the area. Debris exploded into the air, and workers in the vicinity lost their footing as the sheer power of the clash reverberated through the environment. Without hesitation, Conquest seized the upper hand, grabbing Mark and slamming him through a nearby building with ease, his overwhelming strength evident in every move. As Mark struggled to recover from the devastating blow, Conquest loomed over him, his expression one of sheer amusement. He spoke with a mocking tone, bringing up Anissa, the Viltrumite woman who had confronted Mark before. He suggested that she would laugh at the futility of Mark's resistance, claiming that trying to stop the Viltrumites from taking Earth was a foolish endeavor. But Conquest, unlike Anissa, didn't care about the politics or reasoning behind the invasion. He was here for the fight, for the pure joy of battle. He wanted Mark to resist, because that made it more enjoyable for him. Mark's anger flared. He lunged forward and struck Conquest hard, but the seasoned Viltrumite barely reacted, his expression twisting into a wicked smile. Mark clenched his fists in frustration and launched himself at Conquest again, slamming him through another building. Dust and rubble exploded outward as the structure crumbled around them. Yet, even buried beneath the debris, Conquest remained unfazed. With a single motion, he lifted the heavy wreckage from himself and, without effort, snatched Mark by the throat, lifting him with one arm like he weighed nothing. Mark gritted his teeth and slammed his fist into Conquest's temple, a powerful blow that would have incapacitated most enemies. But Conquest only grinned wider. "Very good," he remarked, his voice filled with twisted delight. Mark's frustration boiled over, and he punched him again, this time with enough force to send Conquest hurtling into orbit. For the first time, Mark thought he might have gained an advantage. But Conquest was not done. With unnatural speed, he realigned himself and rocketed back down, meeting Mark in the upper atmosphere. The force of their collision sent shockwaves rippling through the stratosphere. Mark tried to twist free from his grip, but Conquest countered effortlessly. Mark braced himself, remembering the last time they fought. He wouldn't let Conquest dominate him so easily again. Breaking Conquest's hold, he shouted, "You tried this already," before delivering a bone-crushing strike. Conquest, his grin never fading, responded, "Enough games." With a single devastating punch, Conquest shattered his monocle and sent Mark plummeting. Mark barely managed to slow his descent, but Conquest was already on him, raining down blow after blow. Blood dripped from Mark's face as he clutched his eye, bruised and swelling from the relentless assault. Watching the battle unfold on the news, Oliver, Debbie, and her boyfriend Paul stood frozen in horror. Debbie's breath hitched as she saw Mark struggling against Conquest. Oliver clenched his fists, ready to rush to his brother's aid. Debbie grabbed his arm, her voice filled with worry, but Oliver reassured her, his expression determined. Paul placed a hand on Debbie's shoulder and said, "Your boys are strong, Deb. They'll be okay." Oliver took off at full speed, pushing himself to his limit, but Conquest and Mark were moving at a velocity he couldn't match. The battle was unfolding too quickly. Mark attempted to reason with Conquest, hoping to de-escalate the fight, but the older Viltrumite had no interest in stopping. He thrived in combat, relishing every punch and counterattack. Before Mark could react, Oliver launched himself at Conquest, catching him off guard. Conquest scowled and demanded to know who he was. Mark, seeing the danger, shoved Oliver aside, sending him flying out of harm's way. Conquest took advantage of Mark's distraction, pressing his elbow against Mark's throat, forcing him downwards with brutal force. Summoning every ounce of his strength, Mark headbutted Conquest, but his opponent barely flinched. Instead, Conquest caught Mark's next punch mid-swing and sneered. "If this is all you've got," he said, tightening his grip, "then you're already dead." Meanwhile, deep beneath the Pentagon, Cecil Stedman watched the battle unfold through surveillance feeds. His jaw tightened as he turned to DA Sinclair, the scientist behind the Reanimin project. "Tell me the alternates are ready," Cecil demanded. Sinclair hesitated before delivering the grim news. "Their enhanced tissue is too dense. We can't make the necessary incisions to complete the process. They won't work. Cecil's face paled as he realized the full gravity of their situation. He turned back to the screen, watching Mark struggle against an unstoppable force. His voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, "Then God help us all." Adam and Betsy Wilkins sat in front of the television, their expressions tense as the news anchor misidentified the looming figure of Conquest as Omni-Man. The city in the background was in ruins, smoke rising from crumbling buildings, while civilians scrambled for safety. In the hospital room, Eve stirred for the first time in 2 days, her body still weak from the brutal injuries she had sustained. Her eyelids fluttered open, her mind foggy, but as soon as her vision cleared and she saw the news broadcast, panic surged through her veins. "Where is Mark?" she asked urgently, her voice hoarse from disuse. As her eyes adjusted, she caught sight of the screen displaying a brutal battle. Mark, bloodied and exhausted, was struggling against an opponent who seemed almost unstoppable. Her breath hitched. She needed to get to him. In her haste to rise, she inadvertently revealed Mark's identity as invincible, causing the medical staff to exchange shocked glances. Eve ignored their reactions and turned to the nearest doctor. "Get Cecil," she demanded. "I need transport now." Meanwhile, the battle raged on. Conquest hurled Mark across the battlefield, his body slamming into the rubble with sickening force. The veteran Viltrumite exuded confidence, his sheer dominance making it clear he was toying with his opponent. As he towered over Mark, he grinned maliciously. "I met your father, you know," Conquest remarked, his voice dripping with amusement. "I knew him when he was younger. He showed so much promise." Mark, though battered and bruised, refused to back down. Before he could retaliate, Oliver intervened, swooping in at high speed. He caught Conquest off guard, managing to pull Mark to safety for a brief moment. "You can't fight him alone," Oliver shouted. "He's old as dirt. We can take him down together." Conquest chuckled darkly, his amusement unwavering. "You think age makes me weak?" His response was immediate, a devastating punch to Oliver's face that sent teeth flying. Without hesitation, he grabbed Oliver's arm and twisted until a sickening snap echoed through the battlefield. Oliver cried out in agony, his body convulsing as Conquest prepared to rip him in half. Before he could finish the job, Mark lunged at him with everything he had left. He struck Conquest, forcing him to release Oliver, and their battle resumed with renewed intensity. Meanwhile, Cecil, monitoring the fight from a control center, dispatched a medical team to retrieve Oliver. He knew things were spiraling out of control. Debbie sat at home, her hands trembling as she clutched the phone. The moment she heard that Oliver was alive, relief flooded her, but the tension in her chest remained. Paul, sitting beside her, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, trying to offer comfort, though they both knew nothing could truly ease the horror of watching Mark fight for his life. Across the city, William, Rick, Amber, Gary, and Art watched the news in grim silence. Each blow Mark suffered made them flinch. He was getting beaten to the brink of death, and there was nothing they could do but watch. The battle reached a new level of devastation as Conquest launched Mark into the ocean with bone-crushing force. Mark's body collided with a massive destroyer ship hovering above an island, sending shockwaves through its metal structure. Despite the agony coursing through him, Mark retaliated, striking Conquest with every ounce of strength he had left. Just then, Eve arrived, streaking across the sky like a comet. The sight of her sent a jolt of fear through Mark. "No! Stay back," he shouted, but it was too late. Eve, determined to assist, encased Conquest in a glowing energy bubble. For a brief moment, it seemed to work, until Conquest effortlessly shattered it. With terrifying speed, he closed the distance and drove his fist into her stomach, impaling her clean through. Mark let out a blood-curdling scream as Eve collapsed into his arms, blood pooling around them. He cradled her, his mind racing in horror and grief. "Stay with me," he begged, his voice breaking. "Don't leave me." Conquest, watching the display, cocked his head curiously. "You really care for her, don't you?" He licked the blood from his fingers, savoring the taste. "Interesting, though it only makes you weaker." Emotions like that don't belong in a Viltrumite. Mark's despair morphed into something else, something darker. His trembling body stiffened as pure, unfiltered rage took over. He glared up at Conquest, his eyes burning with fury. "I don't care how strong you are. I don't care how fast you are," he growled, fist clenching. "You will not live to see tomorrow." Conquest lets out a sinister laugh, mocking Mark's defiance. He taunts him, daring Mark to unleash everything he has left. Without hesitation, they launch at each other with terrifying speed, their fists colliding with such force that the impact sends shockwaves rippling through the air. Mark's forearm fractures upon impact, while Conquest's cybernetic arm shatters, the metal and wires bursting apart in a violent explosion of debris. Despite the searing pain, Conquest remains unfazed, his expression twisted into a delighted grin. He's enjoying this far more than he should. Seizing the moment, Mark presses the attack, slamming his fists into Conquest's body, driving him back. Conquest roars and lunges, attempting to crush Mark in a bone-crushing bear hug, but Mark retaliates in sheer desperation, sinking his teeth deep into Conquest's shoulder. The bite is savage, tearing into muscle and sinew, ripping flesh apart as blood pours from the wound. For the first time, Conquest recoils, his amusement fading into a brief flicker of pain. As the brutal fight rages on, Eve's unconscious body stirs. Despite the grievous wound she suffered, her powers instinctively activate, accelerating her healing. Her body begins to repair itself on a cellular level, reconstructing the damage as she forces herself awake. Meanwhile, Mark relentlessly pummels Conquest, landing blow after blow, his strength fueled by rage and desperation. But as soon as he notices Eve regaining consciousness, his focus falters. That split second is all Conquest needs. With a monstrous swing, he drives his fist into Mark's ribs, the impact sending shockwaves through his body. Before Mark can recover, Conquest turns his attention to Eve. Determined to eliminate her before she can fully recover, Conquest advances, his eyes burning with cruel intent. Eve, still weak, musters every ounce of energy she has left and fires a concentrated blast of energy at him. The beam sears through the air, striking Conquest head-on, charring his flesh and burning away large portions of his skin. He staggers, his body smoldering, but he remains standing. Eve collapses, her body drained, leaving her completely exposed and defenseless. Mark's vision goes red. He charges at Conquest with renewed fury, landing a series of devastating blows. "You won't touch her," he roars, his voice filled with unrelenting rage. But Conquest, ever the sadist, merely grins and catches one of Mark's punches mid-swing. With terrifying strength, he crushes Mark's hand in his grip, the bones snapping audibly. A scream of agony rips from Mark's throat as he falls to his knees, clutching his shattered hand. Conquest throws his head back in laughter, relishing the pain he's inflicted. But Mark refuses to stay down. With pure willpower, he lunges forward and slams his forehead against Conquest's face, again and again, with such force that Conquest's skull visibly fractures, his features distorting into a grotesque mess of broken bone and torn flesh. Mark's body gives out, his injuries overwhelming him. His vision blurs as he collapses onto the ground, his consciousness slipping away. As darkness overtakes him, he sees Eve, weak, vulnerable, but alive. Their eyes meet for a fleeting moment, and despite the pain, Mark reaches for her. "I love you," he whispers. With a weak but determined voice, she responds, "I love you too." Before either of them can succumb to their injuries, salvation arrives. A wave of reinforcements floods the battlefield. The Guardians of the Globe, Youngblood, Savage Dragon, and several of Earth's greatest heroes from across the Image universe descend upon the scene. Medics rush in, securing Mark and Eve while the others prepare for the next phase of battle. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Invincible, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into your favorite comics. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this chapter and what you're excited to see next. See you in the next video.